Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we are studying Hosea 9. That's the prophet Hosea, Parak Tes. We continue with the stinging rebuke and criticism of the northern kingdom Israel by the prophet Hosea. Within these words of rebuke, of course, there is much to learn, but it is not very pleasant reading. But let us read it and try to learn as much as we can. This is Saul Weinreb, the host for your podcast. So this chapter begins with kind of a new twist on the turning of the northern kingdom to others for support rather than turning to God. And until now, we were speaking about the people when they were in distress, that instead of turning to God, worshiping God, praying to God, and living good, honest lives of chesed and emes, as Hosea was mentioning, of kindness and truth, instead of doing that in order to better their situation, they instead turned to other kingdoms, making alliances with Assyria, with Egypt, and others, and of course thereby becoming subservient to them, adopting their idolatrous and dishonest and corrupt ways. Now we are going to look at a different aspect of what happens when people turn to others rather than to God. And in a sense, this may even be a sadder way, because by living a godly life of chesed, of kindness and emes and truth and das, knowledge of God, these ideas, these ideals which Hosea has been preaching, and justice and so on, one also lives a life where one enjoys the bounty and the products of their labor and their work. The products of their society become wonderful and enjoyable and something worth of celebrating, especially when it comes to times of the festivals and the celebrations. The celebrations of God become very joyous indeed. They become times of happiness before God. They become times of love. They become times of togetherness with the family, togetherness with the people, the community, and togetherness with God, of course. However, when one is in a corrupt world, when one becomes subservient to corruption and dishonesty and so on, then the types of celebrations one has becomes very selfish, becomes very indulgent in physical pleasures and so on. So here Hosea is saying, when you make these alliances and you become subservient to these other nations rather than turning towards God, your celebrations become corrupted. Al tismach Yisrael, this is verse 1. Do not be happy, do not enjoy and rejoice, Israel el gil ka'amim, with the rejoicing of these like those other nations do. Don't get stuck in that kind of trap, because what has happened, unfortunately, ki zonisa me'ala el hohecha, you have strayed from God, you have turned away, you have strayed away from him with the language of zonisa, which Hosea has been using over and over again, the language of the straying of an unfaithful spouse. You have strayed away from God and turned to other places, and you're going to end up celebrating like those other nations celebrate. Ahavto esnan, you have enjoyed the gifts, the corrupt gifts, the bribes. Esnan also refers to the gifts one gives to a prostitute in order to enjoy her favors. This is the kind of relationship you have. You turn away from God and you make yourself subservient to those other nations, and now what are you enjoying? You're enjoying what they have to give you. Al kol garnos dagan, you're doing that instead of enjoying your granaries full of grain that you could have worked for through honest labor. Now, I am note that in these next few verses, I'm going to be translating these quite differently than most of the commentaries. I'm going to be referring, and I'll point out some of the differences as we go through these next few verses. But first of all, over here, I'll call Garnos Dagon. I am many of the commentaries look at this as the esnan is the garnos dogon, is the grain that one receives, the present, that the payment that one gives to the harlot is the garnos dogon. I'm looking at that different as al kol garnos dogon is the language used here. You have loved the esnan instead of the garnos dogon. In other words, the garnos dogon, the granary is full of grain, is the good thing that you could have enjoyed, but instead you're just enjoying payoffs from those corrupt nations. Goren voyekev lo yiraim. I'm going to continue reading it the way I've been reading it. They, the people of Ephraim, will not enjoy the goren and yekev, the granaries and the wine and the grapes that they grow themselves. They will not get aid and help from their own products. V'tiroshi chacheshpa, and the new wine that they get will betray her, will abandon the people, because they're getting this from corrupt sources rather than getting this wine from their own labor. Lo yeshvu be'eretz Adonai. These people that are corrupt like this, they will not get to live in the land of God. You only live in the land of God if you honestly work the land of God, if you honestly live there and you use it for kindness and you use it for truth and so on. Instead, if this is the way you're going to act and you're going to turn to other lands for their benefits, then why do you even need to be there in the first place? So, V'shav Ephraim l'Mitzrayim, I'm going to return you back to Egypt. The northern kingdom, God says, I'm going to return you back. Why did I take you out of Egypt in order to be here and then go and be subservient to everyone else? What's the whole point? Uva Ashur, and in Assyria you're going to end up Tameo Chelu, and you're going to end up eating food that's improper, that's unkosher. Because what's the whole point if you're not growing your grain and you're not working the land and you're not living honestly in Israel? You might as well just go back. Lo yischu la'Adonai yain, and you will never get the chance to pour wine for God, because the celebration is done appropriately. One pours wine for God. One, we know, of course, in Jewish rituals, wine and the holiness of wine for Kiddush on Shabbos, and we know in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, wine would be poured on happy occasions. But no, you will not get that chance. V'lo ye'ervu lo zivchehem, and their zivchehem, their sacrifices will not be sweet before God. As we mentioned several times, Hosea said, the sacrifices they bring are brought as appeasement, but not brought as a celebration for God's holidays. If they were brought in celebration, they would be sweet before God. There would be times where families can get together and bring a sacrifice to God and sit down together and eat and enjoy the bounty and invite over friends and invite poor people that need to eat and so on. However, kilechem onim lahem, this their food is just simply food to satiate their hunger. Kol ochla vitamo, ki lachmam linafsham. They are taking their bread for themselves. Lo yavo beis Adonai. This will not come in front of God. Matasu liyom moedu liyom chag Adonai. What are you going to do, the prophet says, when the day of the holidays come, when comes time to celebrate Passover and to celebrate Shavuot and to celebrate Sukkot? All of the holidays you're supposed to celebrate before God. What are you going to do? Liyom chag Adonai, and for the day that is the holiday before God, what are you going to do? Most of the commentaries look at this as the Yom Moed, as the day of destruction. I think this is actually referring to what I just described, that the loss of the celebration of the holidays because of their corruption. Ki hine holchu mishod, because you have just left destruction. You have just gone from destruction. That's where you were before. You were in Egypt, and I took you out of destruction, and I brought you to this land. But now, Mitzrayim to Kabtzeim, once again, Egypt is going to gather you, because you're going to be thrown out of your land. Mof to Kabreim, the city of Mof, which is generally translated understood to be the city of Memphis, the city in Egypt. That's where you're going to end up buried. Machmad likaspam, your desire for their silver, your desire for their money. This could be likaspam, they meaning the people of the northern kingdom. Their desire for their money ate them up. Kimosh Yirashem, they will be inherited by just by weeds and wild growths. or it could mean that your desire for the other people's money, your desire for their money. That's why you tried to sign allegiances with Egypt and Assyria, because that's how you tried to ally yourselves and get their money. But Kimoshi Rashem Choach B'Aleim, in your tents, instead of you living there and living in your nice home, they're just going to be overgrown by weeds and thorns. Bo'u Yemei HaPekuda, the day of remembrance has come. Bo'u Yemei HaShilom, the time has come to repay the sins that you have so terribly done. Yedu Yisrael, the people of Israel know very well. Evil Hanavi, the distress of the prophet, because as we've mentioned several times, if we look back in chapter 4, verse 5, let me just pull that up here. Chapter 4, verse 5, we saw how v'chashalta hayom v'chashal gam navi imcha loyla, that you are tripping up and ruining the prophets. The prophets they can't even say prophecy. They can't teach you because you are just you're harassing them so much. Mishuga ishorach, you are making a man of spirit, the good man, you're making him crazy. You're making him driving him nuts. Literally, Meshuga, you're driving him nuts. Al rov avonecha, because of all of your sins. The few good people that are trying to teach you the right way, you're making them crazy. They can't do anything. They can't accomplish anything. V'rabo mastema, there is so much mastema, and the best translation I saw was the Jewish Publication Society translation of harassment. Mastema meaning harassment. There is so much harassment of those that are trying to teach you good. Tzofe Ephraim, the Tzofe of Ephraim, the one who is the Tzofe, and I'm going to part ways a little bit with most of the commentaries on this pasuk too. The Tzofe of Ephraim is im Elohai, is with my God, says Hosea. The teachers, the ones that are trying to teach the prophets, they are with God. However, Navi Pachya Koshal Golderachav, but nonetheless, you are setting up traps. You're setting up snares, like we studied the word several chapters ago. Pach is a type of trap which it's not a net, it's like a snare or a hook. Koshal Golderachav, which is hooking all the prophets. They are with God and they're trying, but you are setting traps for them and not letting them. Mastema, the harassment, Bebeis Elohav, in the house of his God. So much harassment. The Navi is in the house of God trying to teach, and you don't let him. He'emiku shichesu, you have in a deep way, you have become corrupt. Kimei HaGiva, like in the days of Giva. The days of Giva is generally, it's hard to say exactly what this is referring to, but most likely, most of the commentaries understand that this is referring to Giva, the unfortunate, terrible event of the concubine that was raped by the people of the tribe of Benjamin. It's it's just like a memory of a time of just an evil, bad occurrence that you can compare to there, that you've stooped so down to the level, as far down as was done then during that episode. Yizkor avonam yifkod chatosam. He, God, will remember their sins. He will punish them for their sins. Now, if you recall in Yeshayahu, in Isaiah 5, with the Shirat HaKerem, where Isaiah compared, God compared the Jewish people to a vineyard, that you are a beautiful vineyard, beautiful grapes. Hosea is about to use a very similar a metaphor here. When I found Israel originally, they were like grapes in the desert. So imagine walking in the desert and then finding a beautiful grapevine with nice, juicy, fresh grapes. Kivikura b'te'ena bereshi saw, like the ripening figs when they first start to come out and ripen. Ra'isi avosechem. That's how I saw your forefathers. You were beautiful, you were wonderful back then with so much potential. But however, himabou bal pa'ar, you came to the bal pa'ar, which is reminiscent of what happened in the desert as the Jews were wandering. One of the first major corruptions when they worshipped the idols of Baal Pa'ar, V'yinazru laboshes, and you turned away towards embarrassing, shameful things. V'yushi kutsim ka'ahavam, and you became hated or detested or disgusted in the same way that you were once loved. Nothing as bad as a lover scorned. Again, this is reminiscent of that Isaiah 5, that beautiful love, but then when there's beautiful love in the beginning and the one of the partners turns away, the hatred is just can be so much deeper. Ephraim ka'ofi sofev kivodam, the honor with which Ephraim had in the beginning, that I loved them so much, ka'ofi sofev, flew away like a bird. Mileda umi beten umeherayon, from birth, from the womb, and from their pregnancy. Again, this is reminiscent of what we had in Ishayahu, Isaiah 44, where God compares. I'm just going to read it for you real quick. God was the one who created us from the womb, and so on. However, now what do we see? We see, even though that honor that you had, miledo mi betenu meherayon, is flown away like a bird. It's gone. Kimi gadlu espeneim, even as you raise your children, or they, the people of Ephraim, the people of the northern kingdom, raise their children. Vishekaltim me adam, I will still make it in such a way that they don't have people. Their population will not grow. They will wither away. We've had this several times in Hosea so far, where he said the population will not prosper. They will not grow. Kigam oi lahem besuri mehem, because when I turn away from them, the suri is spelt with a sin, but can also the same word as with a samach, besuri mehem. When I turn away from them, God says, there will be woe unto them. The people will suffer. Things will get worse. Ephraim ka'asher ra'isi litzor shesula b'nova. Ephraim, just like I saw when I built Tyre. Tyre was is often brought up as an example of a beautiful built-up city that was built up in a beautiful nova and a beautiful meadow, a beautiful field. That's how Ephraim was. That's how the northern kingdom, that's how Israel was once upon a time in the beginning. However, Ephraim, but now, lahotzi el horeg banav, they have lived in such a way that they're bringing their children, their future, their descendants are being brought to the murderer. They're being brought to those that are going to eventually come, conquer, and take them over. It's so the sadness of once so beautiful, but unfortunately the future looks so bleak because of the way they have been acting. Tein lahem Adonai. This is he starts with the prayer, give to them, God. Mati tain, but what should you give to them? In other words, he starts to pray, the prophet starts to pray for people, for the people, but then he thinks, well, why should I pray? He's praying for a future, praying for children, because that's been the theme of these last few verses. But then he thinks, well, why should I pray that they have children, that they raise families, if they're going to end up being destroyed? So he says, and this is such a tragic thing to say, Tein lam rechem mashkil, give them a womb which is going to miscarry, v'shadayim tzomkim, and dried up breasts that can't nurse. Why should they give birth to healthy babies and nurse healthy babies if they're going to end up being destroyed anyway? Kol ra'asam ba'gilgal kisham sinesim, all of their evil ways, just like in Gilgal, which is the area where the people early in the days of Joshua, when they first came in to the land, it all started back then. Kisham sinesim alram halam, over there I have already hated them because of their terrible deeds. Mi beisi agar shame, I will, God says tragically, I will get rid of them from my house. Lo osef avasam kol soreim sorim, I will no longer love them, because all of their leaders have turned away from me. Huka Ephraim has been struck. Sharsham yavesh, their roots have dried up. Pri Bal Ya'asun, they will no longer bear children, meaning they will no longer raise a future. Gam ki yeldun, and even when they do give birth, vehemati machmade v'tam, their children will not grow and prosper; they will end. Yim asem Elohai. The prophet says, "My God has turned them away. He has been disgusted with them. Why? Kilo shamulo, for they have not listened to them. V'yuno didim bagoyim, and they shall go wandering among the nations." As tragic as this ends, as tragic as this sounds, that they will wander among the nations, we do, of course, know that as we go through the words of Hosea and listen to this criticism, we will also find words of comfort. I just want to reassure you that there will be words of comfort for the ultimate future. Thank you so much for studying Hosea 9. Looking forward to studying chapter 10 with you as well.